Yeah, I have started the record. Yes, guys. So today we are going to add one more functionality in our application. Currently we have this addition, right? We have the unit test cases also. We saw how to trigger the build phases, different build phases from Eclipse as well as from our command line, right? So today we are going to add one more functionality and then we are going to trigger one more build. Okay, so let's go to the calculator class. Let's add one more functionality called subtraction. Subtraction is a method which will take again two numbers and this functionality will perform the subtraction operation and it will return the result back to the caller. So this is the functionalities implementation. Okay, so I would also add the comment here. Should be two numbers and subtract the second number from first and will return the result back to the caller. This is the functionality. So it should be not void, the return type should be int actually, right? So this is the implementation. Now let's add the test cases. So let's go to the src test java. In this package, let's create one more class called test subtraction functionality, and let's click on this finish. So in this we are going to write this class contains unit tests for subtraction functionality. Okay, so let's write the unit tests. So we need a object variable to be defined at the class level. We need a result variable to hold the result of the test cases in a variable called res. Then let's start with create obj. We need the object of the calculator class to be created very first, right? So it needs to be before class, this particular method. So the job of this method is to create the object of a class. So let's create it. Okay, now let's start writing our test cases. So first, test subtraction with two positive numbers. So this is the first test case we want. Next is, now you can put the methods in any order. The execution would always be based on the priority you would set. Okay, so the order in which you write the methods in a class doesn't matter, right? So test subtraction with one positive, one negative, another test case which I would like is test subtraction with zero non-zero numbers. Another would be negative numbers with two negative numbers, and yet another would be one positive, one negative. Right, so these are the test cases. Okay, we are done with one positive, one negative. Okay, we need test subtraction with 0 and 0. Okay, so these are the 5 test cases we want, and another method which will take care of setting the object to null. So set obj now let's annotate the methods. So this would be after class. We want the object to set to null after the execution of all the test cases. Let's set the object to null in this. This particular method would be called at the end. Okay, let's annotate the test cases. So let's annotate the test cases. Okay, 0 and non-zero also we have done. Okay, fine. So which is positive, one negative, 0 non-zero with 2 negative. Okay, then that's fine. Let's remove this. Okay, so we have the after class. Now let's annotate the test cases. So this @test priority, let's set it to 1. @test priority, let's set it to 2. @test priority, let's set it to 3. Then @test, let's set the priority to 4. Okay, now let's write the test cases. We need one more method. Okay, we need one more method basically to set this res to back to 0, right? So let's have it here somewhere. So I would say public void set res back to 0, and this we want to be executed before the test case method. So I would say before method. Right, now res equal to 0. So this test case, this method would be called by TestNG before it calls a particular test case method. Now let's write the logic for our test case. Res equal to calc dot subtraction. So 2 positive, so let's say 400 and 250. Okay, these two numbers we are going to send, and then we will have the assertion assert dot assert equals, right? So assertion would be res should be 150, and if it is not equal to the 150, or if the assertion fails, then we would like to put some message in the report that subtraction doesn't work with positive numbers. Okay, now let's add the test cases in other methods. So here one positive and one negative number. So let's say, I would say 100 and negative number would be 20. Okay, let's now 120. Subtraction doesn't work with one positive and one negative number. Then another test case would be 0 and non-zero. So let's have some number like 80 and 0. So it would be 80. So if the test case fails, we want to put a message subtraction doesn't work with with 0 and non-zero number. Now let's test this with two negative numbers. So I would say minus 50 minus 20, say. So we want 70. Two negative numbers. Now let's add one more test case wherein we will check test subtraction with first bigger number, first smaller number by subtracting smaller number from bigger number. Okay, so I would say smaller number, bigger number. P subtraction doesn't work if smaller number is subtracted from bigger number. Okay, so these are the test cases. Let's change the priority of this test case to 5. So we have got 5 test cases for this. Let's trigger the test cases and then we will trigger the build. So we can trigger the test cases from here also, just to check if the tests are running fine or not. No need to trigger it from the POM XML. If we trigger it from the POM XML, it will trigger the entire build life cycle. But we just have completed the implementation of the unit tests, so we want to first check if those unit tests work fine or not. So let's trigger it from here itself. Okay, so we have got one error. Just a second. Is there any issue here? Okay, let me trigger it. Okay. Let me trigger it from the POM XML. I have triggered it from POM XML. Okay, perfect. So all the tests are executed. Maybe that was the error because our the test class was not compiled, right? So this test class we have just added, so that has not been compiled. That's why we had got that another error, but that's fine. Now we can, once the compilation is done, we can now trigger it from here also. Maybe it is not taking it from here. Okay, I'll check it, but it should take. I'll check the issue here, but never mind. We want to see that the result of our test cases. So I'll say pom xml run as and maven test. Okay, now there is one failure. Let's see what is that failure. With 2 negative numbers. Okay, so there is a failure with 2 negative numbers. So expected -70 but found -30. So we have done some mistake here. Sorry, it should be -30. Correct. Now let's trigger the tests. The build is successful now. Now the point is, now we have got two functionalities, right? One is addition, another one is subtraction. We have got the tests for two functionalities. Now whenever a developer would add any further functionality, he would be testing the newly added functionality. Also he would be testing the old functionality. That is what we call regression testing, right? So he would also make sure that whenever he will add, let's say, a next function called multiplication, say for example, so that multiplication should not break the existing functionalities of the library, right? That's what he would also want to make sure. So whenever he would trigger a build now, he want to run both the tests, both the functionalities of the both the functionalities of the application he wants to be tested. Now currently Surefire plugin is triggering these tests from this folder. Like what Surefire plugin does is it goes to this src test java and it triggers the functionalities. It triggers the tests. So we can get the tests triggered from TestNG XML also. Now let's create a TestNG XML. I'll explain what the TestNG XML is here. So let's first create the XML and then we will talk about it. So I'm just right clicking on the project. I'll say right click, new and file. So let's create a file called calculator API test cases.xml. So basically we are creating a suite, test suite, which is called TestNG suite. So this is the tag suite. We have to provide a name to it. We can provide any name. So I would say calculator API tests is the name of the suite. Now in a suite is nothing but a collection of test cases. So in a suite you will club the test cases, like module wise you will club the test cases. So I would have a test tag here. So test tag basically helps us in clubbing the tests related to a particular module. So module wise you can organize your tests. I would say test name. In the first test tag I would have all the tests related to my addition functionality. So I would say addition functionality tests. Okay, so this will contain all the tests related to my addition functionality. Another test tag would be subtraction functionality tests. Okay, now here we will include the tests we have written for addition functionality, here we will include tests written for subtraction functionality. That way, once we will add, let's say, multiplication, we will have one more test tag which will include the test cases for multiplication. So let's see how can we include it. So here we have to have classes. Now inside these classes we will include a class. Okay, so and let's add the classes tag here also. Okay, so let's put a name of our class in which we have implemented addition tests. Here we will include the name of a class in which we have implemented subtraction tests. So let's go and get the name of a package. So we have to provide the name of a class. So first we have to provide name of the package dot name of the class. So our class name in which we have implemented the test cases for addition is this, right? So let's say if I have one more test case class in which I have implemented few more test cases for addition functionality, then I would add that class here. Currently we do not have that, but let's say a particular functionalities tests we have again, written them instead of writing them in a single class. Let's say we have divided them into two classes. Let's say one is positive tests, another class would be containing a negative test, say for example. So I would add those both classes in this test tag. So test tag basically clubs the tests for a particular module, right? So that's how you can organize your tests. Now let's add a class for our subtraction. I'll just change the name of the class. Let me go here and subtraction. I'm putting the name of a subtraction class. Okay, so now this TestNG, basically TestNG will run the suit. So how the execution would be now, let's understand. We will trigger the execution from this suit now. Okay, our Surefire plugin will trigger TestNG. TestNG will start executing the tests mentioned in this suit example. Okay, now how the execution would be, let's see. What TestNG will do is, it will take this first test tag for the execution. Now we can reverse the order also. If we want the subtraction to be tested first before the addition, that also we can do. Okay, so TestNG will take the test tag, the first test tag. It will start the execution of a first test class mentioned in the classes. So it will start this class. Okay, now let's go to the class and see the execution order. So here this subtraction, basically we have mentioned the subtraction, right? So subtraction, it will start the execution. So subtraction, so here it will start the execution of this class. As soon as it starts the execution of the class, it will scan the entire test class and see if there is any method annotated with before class. So we do have it. So this method it will call first. We will get our object created. Then TestNG will, so let me write the order of the annotations. So first it will call a before class of first test case class mentioned in a test tag in the TestNG suite. So before class. Then it will trigger the first test with the priority 1, but before that it will call this method and we will have our res variable set to 0. So next would be before method. Then it will call this test case priority 1. So next execution would be @test. Now if you want anything to be done after the execution of a test, let's say if you want to clear something, it could be any requirement, but currently we do not have any such kind of a requirement, but let's assume that as we have the requirement here that before the test starts, I want my res to get set back to the 0. So this is something which I want to execute before every test case. So similarly, if I have any requirement of executing something after every test case, I also can have a method for that. So let's have it here. So I would say execute after test case method. So I can give any name though, but currently we do not have that requirement, so I am just giving some random name. And I'll just, for now we do not have any logic to be written here, so I would say I'll just put a message here, println, and I would say this method would be executed after each test case method. And the annotation for this would be after method. Okay, so let's understand the execution. So before very first our before class would be executed for a class. Then before it calls the first test case, it will call a before method. It will call a test case with priority 1. Once the test case execution is done, it will call after method. Okay. It will call after method. Then it will call the next test case priority 2, but before that it will again call before method. So it will call before method and will get our res variable set back to 0. Then it will call our next test case with priority 2, and then it will call after method. So kindly understand that this before method and after method, these are getting called for every @test method. Before method gets called first, then the test case method gets called, and once the test case method is done, after method gets called, and then TestNG moves to the next test case, right? So that is how the execution of the test case would be, right? Now let's assume that in a suit we have one test at the one test tag. As I said, a test tag is used to club the test cases for a particular functionality. So we have got this test tag clubbing together the test cases on addition subtraction functionality. This test tag is for clubbing together test classes having addition functionality tests, right? So let's assume that if you want to execute something, maybe it could be any requirement, but if you want to execute something before a test on a particular functionality starts, like TestNG runs the test cases test tag by test tag, okay, as I had already told you. So once TestNG starts the test tag, okay, it will run the test case classes from that test tag one after the other. So first it will start this test tag, then it will, if we have any further classes, then it will execute those in an order in which we have defined them here, and then once the test tag completes, it will move on to the next test tag. Now let's say I have something to be done before a test tag starts. So before a particular test tag's testing starts, that is before a TestNG calls the very first test class from this test tag, if I want to do something, that is if I want to do something before TestNG starts the testing of a particular functionality, it could be anything, but if I have something to do, then what I would do is I will add a method here, do before testing of subtraction starts. Okay, now we do not have any logic here, but let me put the message: this method would be executed before test tag starts execution. Subtraction functionality test tag. Okay, and the annotation would be before test. Now this is quite interesting. Like, people usually get confused between before test and before method. Okay, I will explain you what is before test and before method. Okay, we will see the actual execution order in some time. Let me add one more. If I want to do something once the execution of a particular test tag completes, so after the completion of a particular test tag, that is after the completion of a testing of a particular functionality, there could be a number of classes here. Let's say there are 10 classes, okay, in this test tag. I want to do something once all the test classes clubbed together in this test tag. I want to do something after that, right? So I would add a method, and I would say public void do after testing of subtraction. So subtraction ends, and the annotation would be after a test. Now let's see the difference between before method and before test, and after method and after test. So this is where many a times people get confused. So let me add something here. After okay, now let's understand the order of the execution. Okay, let's go to the POM XML. No, not POM XML. Let's go to the TestNG XML. We will start the execution. Okay, TestNG will execute the suit XML. It will start the execution of this test tag, which is defined first. So as soon as TestNG starts the execution of this test tag, let me add few more classes here, though we do not have them, but just as a placeholders I am adding them just to make that the execution of that before test and after test clear. Okay, so let's say I have 3 test classes in which I have implemented my unit tests for subtraction functionality. Now let's see how the execution would be done. So TestNG would start the execution of the test tag. As soon as it starts the execution, what TestNG will do is it will scan all the test classes to find any method annotated with before test. Okay, it will scan all the test classes mentioned in this particular test tag to find method annotated with before test. Now we have got the before test method in a subtraction, so it will call that method first. So this is how we can achieve the execution of a particular thing which we want to do before testing of a particular functionality starts. So before test will get called, and then the test tag execution will start. So before test would call, and then TestNG, what it will do, it will start the execution of these individual classes one by one. So it will execute this test case class with before class, then before method, test case method, after method, before method, test case method, after method. So this will go on for all the 5 test cases. Okay, this will go on for all the 5 test cases written in a first test case class. Right, so this will go on for this class. Similarly, now then what it will do, it will start the execution of this class. If this class has a before class, that before class would be executed, and all the test cases written in this particular class would be executed in the order before method, test case method, after method. So this order of the execution would be done for each test case written in a class. Once that is done, after class would be executed, of course, which we missed here, after class. So after class for a first test case class, so before class for first test case class, then all the test case methods in order, before method, test case method, after method, before method, test case method, after method. This will go on for all the 5 test cases. Once all the 5 test cases are done, after class would be executed for first test case class, and then it will start the execution of second test case class. So in this, for this particular test case class also, the execution would be before class, then before method, test case method, after method. This would be done for each test case method. Once all the test cases are done, then the after class of this particular class, and then TestNG will start the execution of third test case class in the same order, before class first, and then each test case would be called according to the priority, but before the test case it will execute before method, and after the test case it will execute after method. That is how the execution would again be done for all the tests mentioned in this class. And now once all the test case classes execution are done for a particular test tag, now TestNG will stop the execution of this test tag, right? A particular functionality's testing will stop now. Now before it will stop the execution of this test tag, again it will scan all the test classes to find if there is any method annotated with after test. So please understand, before test and after test, these two annotations are connected to a test tag, and before method and after method, these are connected to a particular test case. Don't get confused. Before test and after test, its job is altogether different. If you have anything to be done before the testing of a particular functionality starts, that should go in before test tag. and that before test tag method could be anywhere. I mean, it could be in the first test case class, it could be in second, it could be in third. As long as this class is part of the this particular test tag, it would be called, right? Similarly, if you have anything to be done, once the execution of all the tests for a particular functionality is done, then that should go in after test. Okay, so that it would be called once all the test classes for a given test tag done its execution. Okay, now again that after test annotated method again could be anywhere, either in the first test case class or in second or in third or in fourth, fifth, whatever. Okay, if you have, let's say, 10 classes in this particular test tag, then before test and after test could be anywhere. TestNG scans all the classes to find before test and after test. Okay, so please understand, before test, after test, they are connected to a test tag, and before method, after method, they are connected to a particular, to a test case methods and test tags. Please understand this. Okay, now once this is done, then TestNG will start the execution of this test tag. Again, the order would be same. First, it will scan all the classes from this test tag now to find if any of those have before test method. If it has, if any of those have, then that before test will be executed, and then TestNG will start the execution of test classes one by one. Once all the test classes are done, then TestNG will scan all the test classes again to find after test method, and it will execute that. So that way the entire suite would be executed. So if you have a suite XML and you want TestNG to trigger the test from the XML, then by default what happens is Surefire plugin by default triggers the tests which are there in this src test Java in the order in which they have defined here. But if you want the order to be followed, if you want the order of the tests to be followed from the XML, then you need to do one thing. I'll show you what you need to do. What you need is this Surefire plugin, which actually does the job of execution of the unit tests. Here you need to, not here, sorry, Surefire. Here you need to add a configuration. And in this you would add suite XML files, and here you will add suite XML file, and here you will mention the name of your XML file. Okay, so you might have multiple suite files as well, but we have only one, so I'm just mentioning the name of this. Just a minute, let me copy the name, refactor, rename. Okay, I just want the name of this. Okay, I'll just take it from here. Control C, and I'm just going to mention the name in my POM XML. So here I will be mentioning the Now this should be relative, I mean the location of this XML should be relative to the POM XML. What I mean is, currently our pom.xml and our TestNG XML, they are in the same directory. You can see here, both are into this calculator API. I will show you here. See, both of the files are in this calculator API directory. Okay, let's say that I have this particular file in some directory. So I would say TestNG suits, and inside this, if I have this, Control X, and I will just move it here. So now the location of this would be /, the name of the folder, and then the name of the file. So it should be relative location, please understand. Okay, so dot is the current directory in which the POM XML is present. So current directory is this calculator API. In this, it will first look for a folder called TestNG suits. Inside that, it will look for a file called calculator API testcases.xml, and then all the tests from that suite will start the execution. Okay, so it should be relative. This specifying this dot is optional. You can specify the path like this also. Now let's trigger the build. Okay, so I would go to the POM XML and I would say run as event test. First, let's trigger the test and then we will trigger the build. Okay, let me see what is the problem here. Okay. So it has actually, okay, I got it. So it actually considered this as a relative path. Sorry, absolute. So let's put a dot so that it will say current directory, and then from that current directory it will start the execution. So that's fine. Let's save this and let's trigger. Yeah, it has, no, still it has not taken that XML, it looks like. Let me see. Okay. It says that it didn't get, okay. Yeah, I got it. So the errors are because, so everything is good now. The errors are because we do not have these classes, right? So I had just mentioned it. Just a minute. Okay. So just a second, let me refresh. The errors are because in this API, in this TestNG classes, we do not have these classes, right? I had just put it as a placeholder just to explain you when that after test would be executed. So I'm just removing those because we do not have those classes implemented, and let's trigger the tests now. POM XML, right click, run as, and event test. Now it will trigger the test. See, it has triggered all the tests. All the 10 tests are executed. 0 failures we have, 0 errors we have, 0 skipped we have. So tests are running fine now. And if you see the execution order now, this is the execution order. We have put the system out println only in the subtraction tests and only in the few tests. So that's why we see the messages here. If we put the sys out println in all the all the methods, all would be printed here, but we only did it only for few methods. So you can see here a before test got executed first. This is our before test, before it started the execution of our first test tag. And then before method, test case method, after method. Now you will see the after method execution for each of the 5 test cases. See, these are the 5 test cases. And then once the execution of the test tag is done, we have got this. So you can see here, before method is executed 5 times because it is connected to a test case method. But the before test and after test execution is done only once. Before the test tag execution starts and after the test tag execution is done. So please understand the difference between before test, before method, and after test, after method. Don't get confused. Okay, so we can trigger the build now. Let's trigger it from our command line. So I'll just, now we already know that how to trigger a build from command line. So let's this is our project directory. Let's copy the location, open the command prompt. Let's change the drive, change the directory, current directory to our project directory. So we should always be inside the project directory before we execute any Maven command. So now the developer has implemented another functionality, right? The subtraction one. So he would like to release a second version of the library. Okay, that is what happens. As and when the software gets evolved with the addition of different functionalities, we tend to release different version. We don't override the existing version because we might have the customers using the old version and they say do not want to go with the new functionalities, right? So they should be able to keep using the old version. So we should not disturb the older one. We should release the new version. So how to release a new version? In the POM XML, you have to simply change the version to 2.0 and trigger the build. So let's trigger the build. So I would say mvn install. So this will do all the things. Like this will compile our sources of the application. This will compile our unit tests. This will trigger our unit test cases. Then it will package the jar file and it will install that jar file in our local repository. Let's do it. So the execution is done, packaging is done, and installation is done. So let's go and check the local repository. So see users, this is my current user, this is my Maven directory, this is my local repository, and yesterday I told you that how it installs the library. So what is the group ID of our project? It's DevOps batch 1. So let's find the DevOps batch 1 folder. Inside that there would be a folder for artifact ID, calculator API. Inside that there would be a folder for version 2.0, and inside this the library is installed, right?